Hello all, I'm Shalini. I'm a research scholar from Kerala, India, currently pursuing my PhD at University of Calicut. And today I would like to share some of my thoughts on selected Indian Harry Potter fan fiction works that relocates the canon to Indian premises culturally as well as geographically. Before I begin, I need to clarify that the artworks used in this presentation are by individuals who in no way support J.K. Rowling's political point of views. This inclusion is purely for illustrative purposes, and the presentation in no way endorses her opinions. Now, as you can see, my title is quite straightforward in that sense. As someone who grew up in India, on a staple diet of English books, movies, cartoons, I had from an early age developed the ability to engage and be entertained without it having to relate much to my identity. Even as a kid, I knew how the Western idea of a superhero, a Batman or a Superman, would stand out as a sore thumb when imagined within the framework that I was familiar with. Any identification with the main characters then was strictly emotional. I mean, we all expected a letter from Hogwarts at the age of 11, but in all, flying all the way from London to a corner in South India where I lived to deliver my admission letter was too far even for my wildest imagination. It is only much later when I discovered fan fiction that I realized what the real problem was. My imagination was just not wild enough. Imagination is not the only requirement for such a possibility. There should be a tad bit of rebellion inside you, a sense of disappointment, and a lot of love for the story. Now, a scene like this would bring all of the aforementioned qualities in an Indian fan with a snap. The Patil twins are the only, at least slightly significant Indian part of the story. It is not wrong for us then to pin all our hopes and desires on these two characters. While I feel the movie did much to disappoint in that regard, at least the story was decently written in spite of the lack of character arc that most of us expected. The Yule Ball scene from the book, where they are described as having shocking pink and turquoise blue outfits, gave as much to spark that vivid imagination in Indian fans, and it led to countless visualization of the scene. But when this finally appeared in the movie, it was one of the biggest letdown in movie history, as echoed by communities, fan communities online, of course. An opportunity to hope and an eventual disappointment was perhaps the reason why Indian fan fiction writers started this. The thing is, if you're not going to give fans what they want, chances are they would create it for themselves. Now, this is already common knowledge. There are two types of fanfiction writing, transformative and affirmative. Transformative is about active subversions and rewriting, while affirmative celebrates and reinforces the existing plot lines. Our area of discussion today is obviously transformative fanfiction. Why do such transformations exist and why they're relevant? There are numerous motivations behind a transformative fanfiction. One is obviously to channel creativity and imagination, a chance to play with the characters and plot lines without consequences. When you love a story, nothing would be enough. You would ask for more and more, and hence you end up fulfilling your own needs by expanding the universe, creating sequels, prequels, flashbacks, and flash forwards as much as you can satisfy yourself. The chance to follow a what if, to speculate and figure out an alternate timeline had, like, if one of the characters chose differently, what would happen? These are the what ifs that is usually pursued. Or to simply address what you think is a lack in the story, or to contribute, or to even correct it or criticize it. This becomes significant because mostly it fosters a participatory culture of reception as well as creation through collective meaning production and thereby challenges the authority of the author and what they stands for as proven by a number of transfic fan fiction written by Harry Potter fan community. An interesting fulfillment of Roland Barthes' idea of the death of the author, if you ask me. Most fanfiction works are not for commercial platforms, which would mean it contributes more to the historical storytelling culture, where stories pass from one person to another, getting richer and more flavorful due to the added perspective of each individual. It also provides an inclusive platform to continue the dialogue started by the canon, often through a critical point of view. This is where the idea of fans as poachers can be relevant. Henry Jenkins starts his essay Textual Poachers by referring to Sertius' idea. According to him, readers are travelers. They move across lands belonging to someone else, like nomads poaching their way across fields they did not write. Here, there is an ongoing struggle between the reader and the writer. He talks of a scriptural economy that is dominated by textual producers and institutionally sanctioned interpreters who regulate the meaning and restrain multiple voices of popular orality. What he says is that the fiction condemns consumer to subjugation. subjection because they are always going to be guilty of infidelity or ignorance. It is in this infidelity that Jenkins ultimately locates fanfiction writing. In itself, fanfiction writing, a derivative amateur writing, which are basically interpolations and extrapolation by fans of existing literary worlds. In their introduction to fanfiction studies reader, Karen Hellickson and Christina Bousset list certain approaches to understand fanfiction. This includes fanfiction as an interpretive practice, as a communal gesture, a source of sociopolitical argument, as individual engagement and identificatory practice, as one element of audience response, as a pedagogical tool, etc. Now, considering all of this, when we directly look into Harry Potter fanfiction, there are certain questions that we need to answer. The motivations and significance specific to this situation, we need to look at how fans' creativity and imagination intertwine with culture, history, and national identity. We must consider how these stories attempt to expand the source material, which particular gaps they choose to fill, what speculations they find worthy of exploring. We have to look at what meanings they challenge, what dialogues they open, and what aspects of culture or ideology they seek to include or critique. For this purpose, I've selected three fanfiction works, all published in fanfiction.net platform. They are Indian Wizarding Society by Indian Potterhead, Lifeblood by Liron Area, and Adoption into India by Lakshmi 1. Okay. The first fanfiction, Indian Wizarding Society, comes with the tagline, Because Magic Knows No Boundaries. Inspired by the glimpses of magic schools that we get in Goblet of Fire, one cannot help but imagine how such societies, schools, and systems of magic will thrive in other parts of the world. Here we meet the Indian Wizarding Society. We see different schools where magic is taught, its evolving relation with the English wizarding community given the history between India and England. It talks about magical governance in India, modes of transportation, institutions, traditions, magical beasts, connection to Nepal, Tibet, and other neighboring nations, etc. Now, this concept is not limited to a single fan fiction. There are fan communities and individual creators across the internet who have imagined how magic might function in India. The Harry Potter fanon Wikia site describes a school called Varsha Sagar in Meghalaya that teaches Indian brand of magic devoted to mysticism with unique rituals, sports, houses and uniforms. Various creators and platforms like Tumblr imagine the concept further by integrating socio-political realities of India in it as well. The next fanfiction, Lifeblood by Liron Area, grew out of what the author describes as an overflow of Indian feelings. The story focuses on Padma and Parvati Patil, expanding their brief appearances in the original series into a developed narrative that traces their years at Hogwarts. In this reimagining, Harry Potter himself is Indian, a speculation that is quite popular among fan circles, but he was only raised in Britain and he is detached from his cultural roots. The work explores themes such as colorism, skin whitening potions, the white savior complex, critiques of Western feminism, prejudices against Indian culture and attire, Indian dance traditions, India's diplomatic relations with magical beings, and the dynamics of brown family life. The third fanfiction, Adoption into India by Lakshmi 1 follows Sarayu Khan, an Indian social worker who encounters a young Harry Potter being mistreated by Vernon Dursley on the streets of London after an uncommonly easy legal struggle where Professor McGonagall serves as Harry's advocate. Of course, and some liberal use of and truth potions and persuasions later, Sarayu gains custody and brings him to India. There, Harry must adapt to an Indian culture while learning to manage his innate magic. Through Sarayu's guidance, including training rooted in yoga, he begins to channel his powers. The story reveals a distinct Indian magical community with its own school, traditions, historical lineages, and reimagining of how magic operates within India's social fabric. What these three fanfictions inevitably do is not just relocate the story into a different geography, they, from different angles, try interrogating what it means to imagine the canon from a peripheral position. These stories also emerge out of the tension between admiration towards the text and an awareness of exclusions rooted in the history, which is why it is significant to address the colonial past before this. One cannot attempt to establish an Indian wizarding society that spreads out way into the past, that is grounded and complex enough without addressing this particular aspect. In Indian Wizarding Society, Indian Potterhead begins with this. She clarifies that the British imperialism and the Indian independence struggle was a Mughal issue, In spite of that, it had its effect on wizarding communities of both countries. She explains that before British rule in India, the wizarding communities in India lived secluded from one another. There is no mention of a school like Hogwarts where all kinds of students mingled. This would lead us to the assumption that most of the wizards then might be educated at home, which leads us to an interesting question about muggle bones. Considering the caste system in India and the power it had on education, secluded families who can gatekeep magical education when there could be muggle bones out there sounds quite significant. But we don't see that particular threat being pursued. Anyways, with the British rule, wizarding families of India unite against it. There was a time when friendly relations existed between European and Indian wizarding society. Indian wizards were even sent to Hogwarts to study. But with the independence struggle, there were differences of opinions between Indian wizarding society and Ministry of Magic, and as a result, Indian School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was established. What we see in this fanfiction is then a very popular Indian sentiment. Secluded wizarding families scattered all across India joined together against the common enemy during the independence struggle to establish the infrastructures required to bring Indian wizarding society to the mainstream. Although it does not question the pre existing internal hierarchies within Indian society, it runs as a parallel to the rise of nationalist feelings against external domination. The imagined unification of magical communities within India then restages the formation of modern India after the independence. Once this is addressed and out of the way, now we can focus on other integrations of Indian history into the HP canon. In Indian Wizarding Society, the author connects the history of Indian wizards to Indus Valley civilization, which was one of the most sophisticated Bronze Age civilization of the past. The writer discusses how the wizards played a significant role in city building. Similarly, in Lifeblood, we see the twins frustrated by Professor Bin's lack of knowledge of the world history of magic. They have a debate where Binz maintains that a fair negotiation with goblins was not possible, which is the canon's take, obviously. But as per the history she knows of India, the Mughal emperors, particularly Shah Jahan, was able to successfully negotiate with goblins, and that is how Taj Mahal was built. A more humorous yet equally revealing instance appears in Adoption into India, where Sarayu Khan, Harry's adoptive mother, learns about his nature through a fellow Indian wizard. She contextualizes it through Indian history, claiming that some of the nation's most iconic figures were themselves wizards. An example is Mahatma Gandhi, and she connects the ability of Gandhi to endure fasting to his ability as a sorcerer. There is a connection between magic and Gandhi's asceticism, thus the lines between history and imagination gets more and more blurred. The fellow wizard from India, who introduces herself as Sair Talhain, is the keeper of the books for the Department of Magical Child Development under Indian government. She is the one who explains everything about Indian wizarding community to Sarayu Khan. She outlines the schooling options for Harry, that is elementary schooling, and mentions institutions named after such national figures. But there are other options with specific specializations, and that is how she starts bridging the world of history with that of myth, and we get to see how myth intertwines with history. Myths and folklores form the foundation for the fantasy genre itself. In Harry Potter canon, many magical beings and phenomena like werewolves, basilisk, animagi, enchanted objects, charms, etc. are reconfigurations of the Greco-Roman or European mythical stories and folklore. In Indian fan fictions, we can see that this mythical framework undergoes a process of hybridization. The Western magical universe merges with the Indian mythological cosmos, creating a bigger, expanded mythical imagination that is transnational. While talking about the schools in India, Zaire starts with a school of magic in the neighboring country, Sri Lanka, called Asura Academy of Tantra. She has a negative opinion about the school, and this aspect of the story is rooted in the Indian epic Ramayana that tells the story of Lord Rama and Sita, where Rama is considered a god by Hindus, and Sita is kidnapped by the demon king of Lanka called Ravana. The story occupies a central place in India's cultural and moral imagination because of its Hindu majority. So the text borrows from the myth as well as the ideology surrounding it. There is also an underground school called Kali Academy of Magical Arts. Kali, again, is a fierce warrior goddess according to Indian myths, Hindu myths. Then Harry is also renamed as Ekalavya. Ekalavya is also a character from Indian mythology. Now, the streams of magic that are taught in the school are divination, potion making, alchemy, defensive magic, mostly the same as that of the canon. But there are also the magical sport, which is carpet flying, which has more Middle Eastern connection and obviously is popularized by Arabian Nights. A better way to say, in fact, that is that these tools, modes of transportation, or magical aids in general, um, are where we see the customization working its best. The magical carpet, as you can see, is an alternative for the broom, which is used for both transportation as well as for sports. The Indian Wizarding Society also mentions using flue powder and port keys as in the canon, but we also have Central Government International Airport, hidden gate number 3, and then one has to board the flight Air Awadh, flight number 7, to Mayaville, a place where the Indian School of Magic is situated. Again, the use of myth is relevant here. The name of the flight, Air Awadh, comes from Airavat, which is a white flying elephant of Lord Indra, again apart from Hindu mythical stories. Now, there is also talk about vans. In adoption into India, it is said that Indian wizards don't use vans because it increases dependency, that magic should come directly from mind, like using a calculator would reduce your mathematical abilities. But in Indian Wizarding Society, we see there are different types of bands that is unique to Indian soil, especially a tree called Rudraksha. Rudraksha is very relevant here as it comes again as a symbol of asceticism. Continuing that strain, we can see that use of yoga and meditation is also an important part of these stories. In adoption into India, Saryu trains Harry in yoga and meditation to gain control over accidental magic, which I would say is pretty uh, creative, as yoga is marketed as something to control the restlessness of the body. Harry's training in yoga starts after he accidentally changes his teacher's hair purple. During a session with the Dumbledore's army, one of the twins invoked the Nataraja pose, connected to Indian classical dance forms, a pose that embodies the universe, that is, creation, preservation, and destruction, which portrays the rhythm and the balance of the cosmos, connecting magic to spirituality and universal balance. This amplifies the metaphysical aspect of magic. In Lifeblood, Snape takes points from Parvati for using kokum instead of hellebore because according to him that was backward thinking. But the twins connect potion making to Ayurveda and kokum a less toxic ingredient. In Beginning Theory, Peter Barry summarizes Franz Fanon's argument in The Wretched of the Earth by saying that the first step towards a post-colonial perspective is to reclaim one's own past, and the second is to begin to erode the ideologies by which that past has been devalued. Emphasis on Indian history and myth and knowledge systems in this fanfiction can be read as an enactment of this, foregrounding Indian traditions like yoga and Ayurveda that has been reduced to just mysticism usually not only act as cultural motifs but as signifiers of intellectual autonomy. What has been historically devalued also means confronting the stereotypes that have long shaped global perceptions. The fan writer exposes this through a scene where Lavender Brown suggests that Parvati Patil try a skin whitening potion, something that is quite implausible in the canonical universe, but this functions as a commentary on the persistence on Eurocentric beauty standards, forbidding Parvati and Padma to wear saris to the Yule Ball because they looked immodest, while most of the gowns they were wearing to the ball had low neckline, is less about modesty and more about Indian garments not being normalized. Now, here is also something against Hermione Granger, which might be a little hard to accept. In the fan fiction, the writer of Lifeblood portrays Hermione Granger as someone with white savior complex. That complicates her progressive persona because we know Hermione is someone who is vocal about the rights of the marginalized. Her well-meaning critique of the practices of India, like the arranged marriage, and equating it to oppression is called out by the twins because that leads to a generalization of all Indian women as oppressed, a generalization that is often made by Western feminism. The text thus not only reclaims Indian myth and history but also reclaims the right to define Indian womanhood on its own cultural and aesthetic terms, expanding the moral and ideological terrain of Harry Potter universe. Now, as discussed earlier, transformative fan fiction focuses on filling narrative gaps, expanding source material, and pursuing speculative possibilities. Now, these are often embedded with new ideological, cultural, or historical perspective. While it may look like a huge deviation from the canon, it only represents an extension of its interpretive openness. We cannot meaningfully customize a story without allowing the writers own politics, culture, and traditions to be incorporated into it, particularly when the writer is writing or rather rewriting the canon to carve a space for themselves. Despite its critical undertones, there is imagination and play. Most of these stories end with a light-hearted note where Harry and Ginny is visiting India in wearing a kurta. There is also a cultural belonging through everyday gestures. In Adoption to India, Harry enrolls a magical school only so that he could be trained better for the destiny that awaits him at Hogwarts. So, what I was trying to say is that these fan fictions reimagine the canon um, and extend J.K. Rowling's world, restructure its imaginative geography from a more Eurocentric way to a sort of cultural hybrid where the Indian and the Western coexist while not erasing the tension that has been part of the history. They challenge aesthetic hierarchies, subvert stereotypes, and affirm that fantasy need not always be rooted in Western myths, that it can be more open, but they also restore pleasure and play while projecting their own resistance into it. What this reminds us that no fiction is ever closed. We, as Sertu states, we are indeed nomads. Sometimes we do burn and chop the land too hard, but we also end up creating and recreating. So that's all. Thank you for listening.